Human Janitor lived alone for years, until the alien queen's spaceship landed in his garden. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. Miles Harper lived at the end of a long dirt road, far enough from town that the stars actually looked like stars and not just dim pinpricks fighting through light pollution. His small cottage sat nestled between rolling hills and a forest that seemed to stretch into forever, just the way he liked it. The garden stretched out behind his modest home, an oasis of vibrant vegetables and wildflowers that had become his sole companion in the years since he'd withdrawn from society. Tonight, as he sat on his porch watching the stars twinkle overhead, he had no idea his solitude was about to be violently interrupted. Miles took a slow sip from his tea, the steam rising in the cool evening air. At 56, his hair had gone completely silver, though it remained thick and often unruly. Deep lines mapped his weathered face, telling stories of both laughter and sorrow. His hands, calloused and strong from years of physical labor, wrapped around the warm mug as if drawing strength from it. 20 years as head janitor at Riverdale High School had been enough. When his wife Sarah passed away from cancer 5 years ago, he'd cashed in his modest pension, bought this little place in the middle of nowhere, and said goodbye to the endless hallways and hormone-fueled drama of teenage life. Now his days followed a simple rhythm. Tend the garden, fix what needed fixing, read books he'd always meant to read, and watch the stars at night. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees, and carrying with it the scent of his tomato plants and the wildflowers that bordered his property. A perfect night for. The teacup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the wooden porch as a blinding light suddenly flooded his garden. Miles raised an arm to shield his eyes, heart hammering in his chest. The light was accompanied by a high-pitched whine that seemed to drill directly into his skull, setting his teeth on edge. "What in God's name?" he muttered, slowly lowering his arm as the light dimmed enough to see. Hovering about 20 feet above his prized squash patch was something. It wasn't a helicopter or a plane or anything Miles had ever seen before. The object was roughly oval-shaped, perhaps 30 feet long, with a gleaming metallic surface that seemed to shimmer with iridescent colors. Strange symbols glowed along its hull, pulsing rhythmically. There were no visible engines, no rotors, nothing to explain how it stayed airborne. It was, undeniably, a spaceship. "No," Miles whispered, backing up until he hit the porch railing. "No, this isn't happening." As if in direct contradiction to his denial, the ship began to descend. It touched down with surprising delicacy for its size, crushing his squash plants beneath it. A series of clicks and whirs emanated from the vessel, followed by a hiss of escaping air as a seam appeared in its side. Miles should have run. Any sensible person would have fled, called the authorities, hidden in the basement, done something. Instead, he found himself frozen in place, watching with equal parts terror and fascination as the seam widened into a doorway. Light spilled out from the opening, and within it, a silhouette appeared. The figure that emerged was tall and slender, with proportions just slightly off from human. She, had to duck to exit the craft. Her skin was pale blue, almost luminescent in the moonlight, covered in delicate patterns that reminded Miles of frost on a window. She wore what appeared to be armor, though it seemed too elegant and form-fitting to provide much protection. It was crafted from some material that shifted colors as she moved, like oil on water. Most striking, however, was her face. Features just close enough to human to be recognizable, yet alien enough to send a chill down Miles's spine. Large, almond-shaped eyes dominated her face, solid black except for pinpricks of silver that seemed to reflect the starlight. No visible nose, just 2 slight indentations. A small mouth with lips the color of twilight. Atop her head, instead of hair, were what looked like tendrils that moved slightly of their own accord, adorned with what appeared to be jewels or perhaps technological attachments. She wasn't alone. 2 more figures emerged behind her, similar in appearance but clearly subordinate in bearing and with less elaborate attire. Guards, Miles presumed. The first alien, and there was no denying that's what they were, took a few steps forward, then collapsed to her knees with a sound that might have been a cry of pain. Miles's grip tightened on the porch railing. He should call someone. The police, the army, NASA, someone who would know what to do with aliens in a garden. But his phone was inside, and somehow he couldn't tear himself away from the scene unfolding before him. The two guards rushed to the fallen figure, helping her to her feet. One of them looked up, straight at Miles, and said something in a language that sounded like wind chimes and rushing water. Then, impossibly, the words shifted, as if being translated in real time. "Help us," the guard said, the alien mouth not quite matching the English words. "Please. Our queen is injured. We seek sanctuary." 20 years of sweeping hallways, mopping up spills, and dealing with the aftermath of teenage chaos had trained Miles to respond to messes automatically. Before his brain could fully process the impossibility of the situation, he was already moving down the porch steps. "Bring her inside," he heard himself say, gesturing toward his cottage door. "Careful on the steps." The guards exchanged looks. At least, Miles assumed that's what the slight turn of their heads meant, then carefully supported the one they'd called queen between them. As they approached, Miles got his first close look at the alien ruler. Despite her obvious weakness, she carried herself with dignity. Up close, her skin wasn't simply blue but had depth to it, like looking into a clear ocean. The patterns he'd noticed weren't random, but seemed to form a complex language of symbols and designs. The queen's eyes fixed on him, those silver pinpricks focusing with unsettling intensity. "Thank you," she said, her voice melodic despite the obvious strain. "I am Nalaris, queen of the Istrian realm. I apologize for the intrusion." With those words, she seemed to lose consciousness, slumping between her guards. Miles led them into his living room, hastily clearing books from his couch to make space. "Lay her here," he directed, falling back on the practical attitude that had served him well through decades of crisis management in a high school. The guards gently placed their queen on the couch. One of them touched something on their wrist, and a holographic display appeared, showing what Miles assumed were vital signs. "She needs medical attention," the guard said, looking up at Miles. "Our ship was attacked. The queen was exposed to a toxin during our escape." Miles ran a hand through his silver hair. "I'm not a doctor. I don't even know your biology. How am I supposed to help?" The second guard stepped forward. "I am Tavik, Royal Protector. This is Ilix, Royal Physician." He gestured to the guard with the holographic display. "Our medical supplies were damaged in the attack. We need basic elements to synthesize an antidote. Things your planet should have." Ilix nodded. "Water, clean, and plants with medicinal properties. Our scans indicate your garden contains several useful specimens." Miles blinked. "My garden? You want to use my herbs for alien medicine?" "The principles of botanical healing transcend planetary boundaries," Ilix explained, as if this should be obvious. "The queen's condition is stable but will deteriorate without treatment." Miles looked at the unconscious alien queen on his couch, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. 5 years ago, he'd watched helplessly as Sarah faded away, the cancer eating her from the inside, while he could do nothing but hold her hand. He'd sworn then he would never feel that powerless again, which is why he'd moved to the middle of nowhere, to avoid exactly this kind of situation where someone else's life might depend on his actions. "Fine," he said finally. "Tell me what you need." For the next hour, Miles followed Ilix's instructions, gathering herbs from his garden, basil, thyme, lavender, and others, while the alien physician combined them with something from a small pouch at their belt. The resulting mixture was ground into a paste using Miles's mortar and pestle, normally reserved for making pesto. While they worked, Tavik kept watch by the window, occasionally touching a device on his wrist that seemed to cloak the ship from view. "We cannot be discovered," he explained when he caught Miles watching. "There are those who would do anything to capture a queen of Astria." "Why?" Miles asked, handing another sprig of rosemary to Ilix. "And why Earth? Why my garden, specifically?" Tavik's tendrils rippled in what might have been the alien equivalent of a sigh. We were en route to a diplomatic summit when our ship was attacked by Kaldorian raiders. They seek to overthrow the Astrian hegemony and would use our queen as leverage. Our navigation systems were damaged in the escape. This planet was not our intended destination. As for your garden, Ilix added, not looking up from the paste she was creating, it was merely fortune. Or perhaps misfortune, from your perspective. We needed to land somewhere remote, away from population centers, with access to botanical resources. Lucky me, Miles muttered. The treatment, when completed, looked like nothing more than green sludge. Ilix carefully applied it to the queen's neck, where Miles could now see a wound he hadn't noticed before, a small puncture mark surrounded by skin that had turned an alarming shade of deep purple. Now we wait, Ilix said, sitting back. Miles made tea, regular Earth tea, and awkwardly offered cups to the aliens. Tavik declined, but Ilix accepted, holding the cup with evident curiosity before taking a cautious sip. Interesting, she commented. Similar to a beverage from our home world, though less luminous. Your tea glows, Miles asked, desperate for any conversation to distract from the unconscious alien royalty on his couch. It responds to emotional states, Ilix explained. A useful diagnostic tool for our healers. They lapsed into silence. Miles found himself studying his unexpected guests more carefully. Despite their alien appearance, there was something recognizably person-like about them. The way Tavik positioned himself protectively near his queen. The gentle way Ilix monitored her patient. They had culture, technology, medicine. They were people, just not human people. An hour passed. Then another. Miles dozed off in his armchair, only to be awakened by a soft melodic sound. The queen was awake, speaking to her companions in their native language. The purple around her wound had receded considerably. She turned to Miles as he straightened in his chair. Our apologies for disturbing your rest, human. Miles, he corrected automatically. Miles Harper. Miles Harper, she repeated, the name sounding musical in her accent. I owe you my gratitude. And my life, it seems. He shrugged uncomfortably. I didn't do much. Just provided the herbs. Nevertheless, Queen Nalaris said, sitting up with Ilix's assistance. You offered sanctuary when you could have alerted your authorities. That is not a small thing. Miles hadn't even considered calling anyone after the initial moment of shock. Who would he call, anyway? The local sheriff, who was more concerned with speeding tickets than alien invasions. The military, who would turn his peaceful home into a restricted zone. The media, who would ensure he never had a moment of privacy again. How long will you be visiting? He asked instead. Tavik and Ilix exchanged glances. Our ship requires repairs, Tavik said. Several cycles, at minimum. Cycles. Approximately 3 of your Earth days, Ilix clarified. Miles ran a hand over his face. 3 days with alien royalty. Not exactly how he'd planned to spend his week. If our presence is too burdensome, Queen Nalaris began. We can attempt to find alternative. No, Miles interrupted, surprising himself. No, it's fine. You can stay. Just try not to draw attention. I value my privacy. The Queen's tendrils moved in what might have been a gesture of acknowledgement. We share that value, Miles Harper. Discretion is essential for all our safety. As dawn approached, they developed a plan. The ship would remain cloaked in the garden. Tavik would work on repairs while Ilix continued to treat the Queen, who needed rest to fully recover from the toxin. Miles would continue his normal routine as much as possible, to avoid arousing suspicion if anyone happened to visit, though that was rare enough that he couldn't remember the last time he'd had a human guest. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, Miles found himself making breakfast for 3 aliens. They watched with fascination as he prepared scrambled eggs and toast. Your sustenance is derived from bird embryos? Ilix asked, peering at the eggs with scientific interest. When you put it that way, it sounds disgusting, Miles muttered, sliding portions onto plates. But yes, eggs. And bread. Try it. To his surprise, they did. though Tavik scanned the food with a small device before allowing the queen to taste it. Their reactions ranged from curious, Ilix, to cautiously appreciative, the queen, to stoically neutral, Tavik. It is not unlike Pelin root, Queen Nalaris commented, taking another bite of egg, though less pungent. After breakfast, Miles showed them around his small property, keeping to the treeline to avoid any chance of being spotted from the distant road. The aliens were fascinated by Earth's ecosystem, Ilix in particular stopping to examine plants and insects with intense interest. "Your world has remarkable biodiversity," she noted, watching a butterfly with something like wonder. "The Astrian homeworld lost much of its natural variety during the Great Expansion." Industrial Revolution, Miles guessed. Happened here too. We're still dealing with the consequences. The queen, who had been quietly observing, turned to him. "You live here alone, Miles Harper?" Something in her tone made him tense. "Yes, by choice. No family. No mate." Miles looked away. "My wife died 5 years ago." The queen's tendrils drooped slightly. "I grieve with you," she said, in a formal tone that suggested a cultural response to loss. "Solitude is both a sanctuary and a prison, is it not?" Before Miles could respond, Tavik approached urgently. "My queen, I've received a signal. Kaldorian scouts have entered this system. They may have tracked our emergency beacon." The relatively peaceful moment shattered. The queen straightened, all trace of casual conversation gone. "How long? Unknown. But we must accelerate repairs and be prepared to leave at the first sign of their approach." Miles felt a chill run down his spine. These Kaldorians, they'd come here? To Earth. Tavik's expression was grim. They would raise this entire region to capture the queen. "We cannot allow that," Queen Nalaris said firmly. "Miles Harper has offered sanctuary. We will not bring destruction to his world in return." Miles found himself involuntarily straightening at her authoritative tone. Even injured and stranded on an alien planet, she carried herself with undeniable command. "What can I do to help?" he asked. Tavik looked surprised at the offer, but the queen merely nodded as if she'd expected it. "The ship's power cells were damaged," Tavik explained after a moment. "We need conductive materials to repair them. Copper, primarily." Miles thought for a moment. "I have some copper pipe in the shed. Was saving it for a plumbing project, but this seems more important." That afternoon found Miles and Tavik dismantling various household items for parts. Old electronics, wiring from the shed, even the copper bottom of a cooking pot, all sacrificed for the repair effort. Miles had spent decades fixing things around the school, making do with limited budgets and supplies. Those skills were proving unexpectedly useful in spacecraft repair. As they worked, Miles learned more about the Astrian people. They came from a system with 3 habitable planets, all under the rule of the hegemony, a coalition of royal houses with Queen Nalaris's lineage as the central authority. The Kaldorians were a splinter faction, once part of Astrian society, but now rebels seeking to overthrow the established order. They believe our policies of controlled expansion and cultural preservation are holding our civilization back, Tavik explained as he carefully integrated Earth copper into alien technology with tools that seemed to manipulate matter at a molecular level. They want aggressive colonization, military dominance. "Tale as old as time," Miles commented. "People who think might makes right." Tavik's tendrils twitched in what Miles was beginning to recognize as agreement. The Queen advocates for balance. Progress without destruction. The Kaldorians call it weakness. By evening, they had made significant progress on the repairs. Miles cooked again, this time a vegetable stew that the aliens found more palatable than the eggs. As they ate, seated around his small kitchen table, there was an almost normal quality to the scene. If he squinted and ignored the blue skin and moving tendrils, it was almost like having friends over for dinner. The thought made him pause, spoon halfway to his mouth. When was the last time he'd shared a meal with anyone? The school retirement party, probably. 5 years ago. Queen Nalaris noticed his hesitation. "Is something troubling you, Miles Harper?" He shook his head. "Just thinking about how strange life can be. Yesterday, I was completely alone. Today I'm helping aliens repair their spaceship. The Queen's silver-flecked eyes studied him. Life's trajectories are rarely linear. On my world, we have a saying, the cosmic wind blows where it will. We say something similar here. Life is what happens while you're making other plans. Her mouth curved in what might have been a smile. Perhaps our peoples are not so different, despite appearances. After dinner, Tavik insisted on resuming work on the ship, using lights they'd set up in the garden. Miles offered to help, but the alien protector shook his head. You have done enough for today. Rest. The remaining repairs require specialized knowledge. So Miles found himself sitting on his porch once again, this time with the alien queen beside him. Ilix hovered nearby, but gave them space to talk. Your garden is most impressive, Queen Nalaris commented, looking out at the plots illuminated by the ship's lights where Tavik worked. On Astria, growing living things is considered a high art. Here it's just called gardening, Miles replied with a small smile. Nothing special about it. I disagree. Creation and nurturing are always special. She turned those unsettling eyes toward him. You were a caretaker in your previous occupation as well, were you not? Miles raised an eyebrow. A janitor. How did you know? Tavik mentioned your skill with repairs. And I observe how you maintain this dwelling, even in isolation. You are accustomed to caring for spaces. He hadn't thought of his job that way before. Janitor. Maintenance man. Glorified cleaner. But caretaker? That put a different spin on 20 years of thankless work. I suppose I was, he acknowledged. Someone had to keep the school running while the teachers taught and the administrators administrated. Yet you left this role. What? Miles looked up at the stars, thinking about how to answer. After Sarah, my wife, died, nothing seemed to matter much. The routine, the kids, the staff, it all just felt empty. The Queen was quiet for a moment. In my culture, we believe that connection is the foundation of existence. Without it, we wither. Is that why you're part of this? Hegemony? For connection? She made a sound that might have been a laugh. Partially, but it is more complex. I was born to rule, as my mother was before me, and hers before her. But I choose how to rule. Her tendrils moved thoughtfully. The Kaldorians fear the void, so they seek to fill it with conquest. I believe we must make space for the void, acknowledge it as part of the whole. Miles wasn't entirely sure he followed her meaning, but there was something in her philosophical tone that reminded him of the late-night conversations he used to have with Sarah, back when the world made more sense. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp exclamation from Tavik. The protector was staring at a device on his wrist, his posture tense. What is it? The Queen called, rising to her feet with fluid grace. Kaldorian signature, Tavik replied grimly. They've entered Earth's atmosphere. Estimated arrival, 6 hours. Queen Nalaris turned to Miles, her expression solemn. It seems our time here must be cut short. We cannot risk bringing their violence to your doorstep. Miles looked between the aliens, feeling a surprising twinge of regret. But the repairs are sufficient for limited flight, Tavik said, approaching them. Not enough to return to Astria, but enough to lead the Kaldorians away from Earth. That's suicide, Miles protested. The Queen's tendrils moved in what might have been resignation. It is duty. I will not allow an innocent world to suffer for my presence. Miles felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense of purpose, of righteous indignation. He'd spent 5 years hiding from the world, from connection, from responsibility. And now, faced with aliens willing to sacrifice themselves to protect his planet, his home, he found he couldn't just stand by. There has to be another option, he insisted. What if we could complete the repairs before they arrive? Tavik shook his head. Impossible. We lack critical components. Like what? Maybe I can help. We need a stabilizing element for the navigation system. Something with precise crystalline structure that can channel energy without degrading. Miles thought hard. Would a diamond work? I have my wife's engagement ring. The aliens exchanged surprised looks. Ilix stepped forward. It might. With modifications. Then let's try, Miles said firmly. I'd rather not have your deaths on my conscience on top of everything else. He retrieved Sarah's ring from the small box in his bedroom drawer. He hadn't looked at it in years, couldn't bear to after she died. The diamond wasn't large, all he could afford on a janitor's salary, but it had made her eyes light up when he proposed. As he handed it to Ilix, he felt a pang of guilt. Was he betraying Sarah's memory by giving away her ring? Or would she understand that he was trying to save lives? I will treat it with the utmost respect, Ilix promised, seeming to sense his reluctance. For the next few hours, Miles watched in fascination as the aliens integrated the diamond into their ship's systems. Ilix used tools that seemed to reshape the crystal at a molecular level, while Tavik connected it to the ship's power matrix. The carbon structure is compatible, Ilix reported. It will serve as a temporary solution. Dawn was approaching by the time they finished. The ship hummed with renewed energy, the symbols along its hull glowing steadily. We must depart immediately, Tavik urged. The Kaldorians are closing in. Queen Nalaris turned to Miles. Miles Harper, we owe you a debt that cannot be easily repaid. You have shown extraordinary kindness to strangers who arrived uninvited in your garden. Miles shrugged, uncomfortable with the formality. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said firmly. They would not. Your compassion is remarkable, especially for one who has chosen solitude. She hesitated, then reached up to remove a small ornament from one of her tendrils. It was a delicate thing, like a star captured in crystal, a token of our gratitude, and a means of contact, should you ever wish to reach us. Miles accepted the gift, surprised by its warmth against his palm. Thank you. Safe travels, Your Majesty. She inclined her head. Perhaps our paths will cross again, Miles Harper. The pre-dawn light cast long shadows as the aliens boarded their ship. The door sealed behind them, and the vessel rose silently into the air, disturbing the garden plants with its gentle departure. Miles watched until it disappeared from view, a brief flash of light as it accelerated beyond the atmosphere. He stood there for a long time afterward, the alien token in his hand and a strange feeling in his chest. For the first time in 5 years, his solitude felt less like a choice and more like a prison of his own making. As the sun rose fully, Miles surveyed his trampled garden and the empty space where a spaceship had been. Life had intervened in his careful isolation, bringing the cosmos to his doorstep. And now that it had gone, he wasn't sure he could go back to the way things were before. With a sigh, he pocketed the alien token and headed inside to make coffee. It was going to be a long day of gardening to repair the damage. And for once, he found himself wondering what tomorrow might bring. Miles had just set about replanting his crushed squash patch when he heard a distant rumble. Looking up, he squinted against the morning sun, his heart skipping a beat as he spotted 3 dark shapes descending rapidly from the sky. The Kaldorians had arrived, and Queen Nalaris and her companions were long gone, leaving him alone to face them. The ships were nothing like Queen Nalaris's elegant vessel. These were angular, aggressive in design, with jagged protrusions that reminded Miles of predatory insects. Their hulls were dark red, almost the color of dried blood, with pulsing yellow lights along their edges. They descended with none of the grace shown by the Queen's ship, instead dropping like stones until the last moment, when thrusters fired with an ear-splitting shriek. Miles dropped his gardening trowel and backed toward his cottage. His first instinct was to run inside, lock the door, hide, as if ordinary walls could protect him from beings capable of interstellar travel. But something made him stop. The Queen had risked herself to lead these Kaldorians away from Earth. The least he could do was see what they wanted. The ships landed in a triangular formation around his property, crushing more of his garden and part of the fence he'd built last summer. Miles winced at the destruction, but kept his eyes fixed on the nearest vessel as a section of its hull slid open. The Kaldorians were clearly of the same species as Queen Nalaris and her companions, but where the Istrians had been elegant and composed, these aliens radiated aggression. Their skin was a darker blue, almost navy, and the tendrils atop their heads were shorter, more rigid. Instead of the graceful armor worn by the Queen, they were clad in utilitarian suits that bristled with what were unmistakably weapons. 5 of them emerged from the closest ship, led by a broad-shouldered individual whose tendrils were adorned with metal clips rather than the jewels the queen had worn. Miles assumed it was a he, face was marked with what looked like ritual scarring, patterns cut into the skin that stood out as slightly darker blue lines. Human, the leader called out, his words translated just as the queen's had been. You have had contact with Astrian fugitives. Where have they gone? Miles straightened his back, summoning the authority he'd used when confronting troublemakers in school hallways. I don't know what you're talking about. The Caldorian's eyes narrowed, the silver pinpricks focusing intently. Do not attempt deception. Our scanners detected their ship landing at these coordinates. We tracked their energy signature to this precise location. He gestured around the garden. Evidence of their presence is clear. More Caldorians had emerged from the other ships, at least a dozen in total. They began to spread out, examining the ground, the crushed plants, the indentation where the Queen's ship had rested. Commander Drax, one called out, holding up a small device. Residual particles confirm it was the royal vessel. The leader, Drax, turned back to Miles, his expression hardening. The Astrian Queen was here. Recently. Tell us where she went, human, or we will extract the information by less pleasant means. Miles considered his options. He could continue to deny everything, but that clearly wasn't working. He could try to run, but where would he go? He could tell the truth, but that might lead these hostile aliens straight to Queen Nalaris. Despite knowing her for less than a day, he felt a strange loyalty to the alien ruler who had shown such concern for his world's safety. He settled on a partial truth. Some aliens did stop here briefly, he admitted. They were injured. I helped them with basic first aid, then they left. In which direction? Drax demanded. Miles pointed vaguely toward the east, the opposite direction from where the Queen's ship had actually gone. That way, said something about reaching their rendezvous point. Drax stared at him for a long moment, those unsettling eyes seemingly peering into Miles's soul. Then, without warning, he raised a hand device and fired. Miles felt a strange tingling sensation wash over him, not painful, but deeply uncomfortable. He looked down to see his body illuminated by a grid of yellow light that pulsed once, twice, then faded. He lies, Drax announced to his companions. The biological stress indicators are clear. He stepped closer to Miles, looming over him. Perhaps you need motivation to cooperate, human. Your dwelling, perhaps. He raised the device again, pointing it at Miles's cottage. Before Miles could protest, a beam of energy shot out, striking the corner of his porch. The wood splintered and caught fire instantly. Stop, Miles shouted, moving toward his burning home only to be blocked by two Caldorian soldiers. That's all I have. Then tell us the truth, Drax said calmly, as if he weren't destroying someone's home. Where is Queen Nalaris? Miles watched in horror as the flames began to spread along the porch. 5 years of peaceful solitude, his refuge from the world, going up in smoke because of a conflict he had nothing to do with. Something snapped inside him. Not fear, not even anger, but a cold, clear determination. These bullies were no different from the ones he'd dealt with for decades at school, just bigger, with better weapons. And if there was one thing Miles Harper knew how to handle, it was bullies. You know what? I did help them, he said, voice steady despite the fire now consuming his porch. And I'd do it again. They were decent people. Unlike you. Drax's tendrils rippled in what might have been amusement. Decent? The Astrian hegemony has suppressed progress for centuries, maintaining their power while denying the rest of us our rightful place among the stars. All I know is they didn't show up and start destroying my property, Miles retorted. Commander, one of the other Caldorians interrupted, holding up another scanning device. I'm detecting an energy signature consistent with Astrian technology. The human possesses something. Miles instinctively reached for his pocket, where the Queen's token rested. Too late. He realized his mistake as Drax's eyes followed the movement. Search him, Drax ordered. Rough hands patted him down, finding the token almost immediately. The Caldorian soldier handed it to Drax, who examined it with evident satisfaction. A royal beacon, he said, turning it over in his hands. The Queen must favor you greatly to entrust you with this. His expression darkened. Or perhaps you're more than just a helpful bystander. A planned sanctuary, perhaps? An Earth collaborator with the hegemony. I'm just a janitor, Miles said, watching as the fire spread to the main structure of his house. Everything he owned was in there: Sarah's photos, her books, the quilt her mother had made for them as a wedding gift. All the remnants of his former life, disappearing before his eyes. Drax wasn't listening. He was focused on the token, which had begun to pulse with a soft light in his grasp. The beacon is active, he announced with what could only be described as glee. It will lead us directly to her. Miles lunged forward, trying to snatch the token back, but was immediately restrained by the Kaldorian soldiers. Their grip was like iron, their three-fingered hands digging painfully into his arms. Your queen sacrificed herself to lead you away from Earth, Miles said desperately. She was trying to protect innocent people from your conflict. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Drax's expression shifted subtly. Sacrificed? Explain. Miles hesitated, then decided the truth might at least buy some time. Their ship was damaged. The repairs weren't complete. They left anyway when they detected your approach, to draw you away from here. For a moment, something like respect flickered across Drax's scarred face. Noble, but ultimately futile. No matter. We will follow this beacon and complete our mission. He turned to his soldiers. Prepare to depart. What about him? One of the soldiers asked, nodding toward Miles. Drax considered the human for a moment. He has aided enemies of the Kaldorian cause. The punishment is clear. He raised his weapon once more, though perhaps it is more merciful than leaving him to watch his dwelling burn. Miles closed his eyes, thinking of Sarah, wondering if he would see her soon. At least he'd tried to do the right thing, in the end. After years of hiding from life, maybe there was some poetry in dying for something that mattered. The expected blast never came. Instead, a familiar high-pitched whine filled the air, causing Miles to open his eyes. Hovering above them was Queen Nalaris's ship, its hull glowing with energy that hadn't been present before. A voice boomed from the vessel, Queen Nalaris's melodic tones amplified to commanding volume. Commander Drax of the Kaldorian Rebellion, release the human and withdraw immediately. Drax's face contorted with rage. You dare to order me? Your pathetic attempts at evasion have failed, Nalaris. Surrender now, and perhaps we will spare this insignificant planet. In response, a beam of blue-white energy shot from the Queen's ship, striking the ground between Miles and the Kaldorians with pinpoint precision. The earth where it hit crystallized instantly, turned to glass by the intense heat. That was a warning, the Queen's voice declared. The next will not be aimed at the ground. The Kaldorian soldiers holding Miles loosened their grip slightly, looking to their commander for guidance. Drax's expression was calculating, his tendrils moving rapidly, as if processing multiple thoughts at once. You are outnumbered 3-1, he pointed out. Your vessel is damaged. Do you truly believe you can prevail? Perhaps not, Queen Nalaris admitted. But I can ensure you do not either. And more importantly, the ship descended slightly, a new panel opening in its underside to reveal what was unmistakably a much larger weapon. I am no longer concerned solely with my own survival. Miles felt a surge of something like pride. She had come back. Despite the risk, despite the logic of escaping, she had returned for him. Drax must have sensed the shift in the dynamic. His posture changed, becoming slightly less aggressive. A temporary impasse, then. What do you propose? You will release Miles Harper and depart this planet immediately. You will not return, nor will any Kaldorian forces. Earth remains neutral territory, protected under the Seventh Accord. The Seventh Accord applies only to worlds with spacefaring capability, Drax argued. These humans barely reach their own moon. Yet they created a crystalline structure perfect for navigation stabilization, the Queen countered. Their technology follows a different path, but it is no less valid. The Accord stands. Miles had no idea what they were talking about, but he could feel the tension in the air shifting. The Kaldorians were wavering. And if we refuse? Drax asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Then I activate the beacon you hold, the Queen said simply. The one designed not as a locator, but as a quantum resonance trigger. Drax looked down at the token in his hand with sudden alarm. You would not. The energy release would destroy you as well. To protect a world of innocence from becoming a battleground in our conflict? Yes, I would. Her voice softened slightly. We are better than this, Drax. The Kaldorian rebellion began with legitimate grievances against the rigid structures of the hegemony. But this, threatening peaceful worlds, hunting me across the stars, this is not the path to the future you claim to desire. Miles watched in fascination as Drax's expression cycled through rage, calculation, and finally, reluctant acceptance. We withdraw, he said finally. For now. But this conflict is far from over, Nalaris. The hegemony cannot maintain its control forever. I do not wish it to, the Queen replied, surprising both Drax and Miles. Return to Kaldorian space. Send negotiators, not soldiers. I will hear your grievances directly, without the Council's interference. Drax's tendrils went completely still, a sign of shock, Miles guessed. You would bypass the Council? For the sake of peace, yes. Enough blood has been spilled. Perhaps it is time for change. The Kaldorian commander studied the ship hovering above them for a long moment, then nodded once, sharply. One cycle. The Central Nebula. 2 representatives only. Agreed, the Queen said. Now release Miles Harper and depart. Drax signaled to his soldiers, who immediately released their grip on Miles. Before turning to leave, Drax tossed the token back to the human. Your Queen places great trust in you, Earthman. Curious. With that cryptic statement, he and his soldiers returned to their ships. Miles backed away, watching as the angular vessels powered up and rose into the sky, their engines burning hot against the morning blue. Within moments, they had dwindled to pinpricks and then vanished entirely. Only then did Queen Nalaris's ship descend fully, landing once again in what remained of Miles's garden. The door opened, and the Queen emerged alone, moving with the fluid grace he remembered despite her recent injury. You came back, Miles said, still hardly believing it. Of course, she replied, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Her eyes moved to his cottage, where the fire had consumed nearly half the structure. I deeply regret the destruction they caused. Miles followed her gaze, feeling a strange detachment as he watched the flames eat away at his home. It's just things, he said finally. Things can be replaced. Nevertheless, we will make amends. She turned back to him. You saved my life, Miles Harper. Then you faced Kaldorian interrogators without revealing our true direction. You risked everything for someone not of your world. Miles shrugged uncomfortably. Seemed like the right thing to do. Queen Nalaris's tendrils moved in what he now recognized as the equivalent of a smile. Such a simple statement for such a profound choice. She gestured toward his burning home. Your dwelling is lost. What will you do now? It was a good question. Miles hadn't thought beyond the immediate crisis. Return to town? Rebuild? The prospect of starting over at his age was daunting. Before he could answer, a new voice joined the conversation. If I might make a suggestion, my queen? Ilix emerged from the ship, followed closely by Tavik. The Queen nodded permission, and Ilix continued. Our analysis of Earth biology confirms remarkable compatibility with our medical treatments. Miles Harper's knowledge of Earth's botanical resources proved invaluable. Such knowledge could benefit our people greatly. Miles frowned, not quite following. What are you suggesting? Cultural exchange, Tavik said bluntly. You have nowhere to go. We have need of your expertise. You want me to go with you? To space? To another planet? Miles couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Queen Nalaris held up a hand. It is merely an option, not a command. You would be welcome among us, Miles Harper. Your skills as a caretaker, your knowledge of Earth's plants, your perspective, all would be valued in the Astrian hegemony. Miles looked from the aliens to his burning home and back again. 5 years ago, when Sarah died, he'd retreated from the world, seeking solitude as a shield against further pain. Now the universe itself was offering him a different path. I'd be the alien, he said, thinking aloud. The strange one. Yes, the Queen acknowledged. But is that not already your experience here? You isolated yourself from your own kind. The observation struck home. Miles had chosen to be apart, to be different, to avoid connection. Perhaps being an actual alien among aliens wouldn't be so different from how he'd been living already. What about Earth? Would I ever come back? The choice would always be yours, Queen Nalaris assured him. And with the seventh accord now formally extending to Earth, travel between our worlds would be protected by interstellar law. Miles took a deep breath, looking around at the garden he'd tended so carefully for 5 years. The vegetables he'd grown to feed only himself. The flowers he'd planted because Sarah had loved them. The solitary existence he'd built after loss had hollowed him out. And then he looked at the 3 aliens. No, the 3 people, watching him with what seemed like genuine concern and interest. In less than a day, they had brought more excitement, purpose, and genuine connection into his life than he'd experienced in years. "I need to pack," he said finally. "But there's not much left to pack, is there?" Queen Nalaris's tendrils rippled with what might have been relief. "We can provide whatever you require. And I believe you still have this." She gestured to the token he still clutched in his hand. Miles looked down at it, now understanding its significance better. "A pretty powerful little thing, isn't it? More symbolic than anything," she admitted. "Though it does contain certain protocols in case of emergencies. Would have been nice to know it could potentially explode," Miles said dryly. The Queen's mouth curved in that alien almost smile. "It cannot. That was, as you humans say, a bluff." Miles couldn't help it. He laughed. The sound surprised him, rusty from disuse, but genuine. "You're telling me you faced down 3 warships with an empty threat?" "Not entirely empty," Tavik interjected. "Our ship's weapons are quite real. But the token is merely a communication device and cultural identifier. The best strategies often involve misdirection," the Queen said, her tone light, but her eyes serious. "The Kaldorians are not evil, merely misguided in their methods." "I meant what I said about negotiations." Miles nodded slowly. "Change is coming to your hegemony, isn't it?" "Change is the only constant in the universe," she replied. "The question is whether we guide it or are consumed by it." She extended a 3-fingered hand toward him. "Will you join us, Miles Harper? Will you help us tend a garden larger than you have ever known?" Put that way, how could he refuse? Miles reached out and took her hand, surprised by the warmth of her touch. "I'll need to learn a lot," he warned. "I don't know the first thing about alien plants or customs, or anything, really. Nor do we understand all of Earth's ways," Ilix pointed out. "Learning is mutual. And you were a caretaker of young minds for many cycles," the Queen added. "That patience will serve you well." Miles raised an eyebrow. "I was a janitor, not a teacher. In our culture, those who maintain spaces where learning occurs are considered essential educators," she explained. "The environment shapes the mind as surely as direct instruction." It was a perspective Miles had never considered, a validation of his life's work he had never expected, and from an alien queen, no less. He felt something tight in his chest loosen, a knot of inadequacy he hadn't even realized was there. "Well, when you put it that way," he said with a small smile. "How soon can we leave?" "Immediately, if you wish." The Queen gestured toward the ship. "Is there anything you need to retrieve first?" Miles looked at his cottage, now mostly consumed by flames. Almost everything he owned was gone. Almost. "Just one thing," he said, and jogged toward the garden shed, which had remained untouched by the fire. Inside, beneath a stack of old gardening magazines, was a small fireproof box. He opened it to reveal a handful of photos. Sarah on their wedding day, the 2 of them in front of the school where he'd worked, a candid shot of her laughing in their garden many years ago. Box in hand, he returned to the waiting aliens. "Now I'm ready." Queen Nalaris nodded in understanding. "Memories are the one true possession we carry across the stars," she said softly. "They will always be honored among us." Together, they boarded the ship. Miles took one last look at Earth, at the burning cottage, the trampled garden, the blue sky above, before the door sealed behind him. Inside, the ship was both alien and somehow familiar, with curved walls and surfaces that seemed to flow into one another. Lights pulsed along control panels in patterns that made no sense to Miles, but clearly meant something to Tavik as he took his position at what must have been the equivalent of a pilot station. It will take approximately 3 of your Earth weeks to reach Astria, Ilix explained, guiding Miles to a seat that adjusted to his human form as he settled into it. We will use the time to begin your introduction to our language and customs. And to hear more of yours, the Queen added, taking a seat opposite him. Your world has much to teach us as well. As the ship hummed to life around them, rising silently into the air, Miles felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief for what he was leaving behind, not just his home, but his planet, his species, everything familiar. Anxiety about the unknown journey ahead. But most surprisingly, a sense of anticipation he hadn't experienced in years. He was Miles Harper, 56 years old, former janitor of Riverdale High School, widower, recluse, and now, Earth's first unofficial ambassador to the stars. The ship accelerated, Earth's atmosphere giving way to the blackness of space, the blue planet receding behind them. Miles watched it grow smaller through a viewing panel, his heart racing at the sight. Second thoughts? Queen Nalaris asked quietly, observing his expression. Miles shook his head. New thoughts, he corrected. For the first time in a long time. In the vastness of space, as Earth dwindled to a blue marble and then a mere pinpoint of light among countless others, Miles realized something profound. His garden hadn't been the refuge he'd thought it was. It had been a waiting room, a place to heal, to gather strength, until the universe decided he was ready for something more. And when an alien queen spaceship had landed in his garden, the universe had finally come calling. 6 months later, Miles stood in the great conservatory of the Astrian royal palace, carefully tending to the first successful Earth tomato plants to grow in alien soil. Around him, Astrian botanists and agricultural specialists took notes and asked questions about optimal growing conditions and potential culinary applications. The fruit contains numerous beneficial compounds, he explained, gently turning a ripening tomato to show its developing color. And they're remarkably adaptable to different conditions. Like their caretaker, a familiar voice observed. Miles turned to see Queen Nalaris approaching, her royal garments more elaborate than what she'd worn during their first meeting, but her manner just as direct. The Astrian specialists bowed deeply and withdrew, leaving them alone among the plants. Your Majesty, Miles greeted her with a slight bow of his own, not as deep as protocol dictated, but she had long since given him dispensation for his Earth customs. The High Council is most impressed with the progress of the Earth cultivation project, she said, reaching out to touch one of the tomato leaves with evident curiosity. Your expertise has proven invaluable. Miles smiled. I'm just a gardener. The real experts are your scientists who figured out how to adjust the soil composition. Yet without your practical knowledge, they would have continued to approach the problem solely from theory. The Queen's tendrils moved in what Miles now knew was amusement. Sometimes the simplest solutions require the most complex preparations to discover. In the months since his arrival on Astria, Miles had adjusted to his new life with surprising ease. The Astrians, once they got over their initial curiosity about the human in their midst, had been welcoming and eager to learn from him. His modest quarters in the palace complex had a small private garden where he experimented with growing earth plants, and he'd been given access to the vast royal libraries to learn about Astrian history and culture. Most significantly, he'd been invited to attend the historic peace negotiations between the hegemony and the Kaldorian representatives, not as a participant, but as a neutral observer. His perspective as an outsider had proven useful in moments when cultural differences threatened to derail the talks. How are the negotiations progressing? He asked, moving to water another section of plants. The Queen's expression grew thoughtful. Better than expected, in some ways. Drax and his second representative have legitimate concerns about resource allocation and representation in the council. Many of their proposals have merit. And the council? Are they listening? Some more than others. Her tendrils moved in what Miles recognized as the equivalent of a sigh. Change comes slowly to institutions that have existed for millennia. But it comes. Miles nodded, understanding the delicate balance she was trying to maintain, acknowledging the need for reform without capitulating to those who demanded it through violence. The Kaldorian delegation has asked about you, actually, the Queen added, watching his reaction closely. They seemed fascinated by the human who stood his ground against armed warriors. Miles snorted. I was terrified. I just didn't see much point in showing it. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it, she quoted. A human saying, I believe? Something like that. Miles agreed, though he'd never thought of himself as particularly courageous. He'd just done what needed doing, same as he always had. They walked together through the conservatory, a comfortable silence between them. Outside the transparent walls, the 3 moons of Astrea hung in the lavender sky, casting multiple shadows across the landscape. It was a sight Miles still found breathtaking, even after months. I received a communication from Earth today, the Queen said eventually. The official diplomatic team will arrive within the cycle. Miles felt a twinge of something. Not quite anxiety, not quite excitement. So soon. Your planet's authorities have been surprisingly efficient once they accepted the reality of our existence. She gave him a sidelong glance. They are very interested in meeting the human who has been living among us. The revelation of alien contact had caused quite a stir back on Earth, or so Miles gathered from the occasional updates he received. The landing of Kaldorian ships had been witnessed by a few locals, and the burning of his cottage had attracted attention. By the time authorities arrived to investigate, Miles was halfway to Astrea, but the evidence of extraterrestrial visitation had been undeniable. Rather than the panic some might have expected, the confirmation that humanity was not alone in the universe had sparked a wave of scientific and cultural renaissance. Earth's nations had quickly unified to establish a joint space program and diplomatic corps specifically for interstellar relations. Will you meet with them? The Queen asked when Miles remained silent. He considered the question. Do you think I should? I think it should be your choice, she replied. You did not leave Earth as an official representative. Your obligations are those you choose to accept. It was one of the things Miles had come to appreciate most about Queen Nalaris, her unwavering respect for individual autonomy, even as she governed a vast interstellar civilization. She never commanded when she could request, never assumed when she could ask. I'll think about it, he said finally. They'll probably have a lot of questions. As did you, when you first arrived, she reminded him with a touch of humor. Yet you adapted remarkably well. Miles smiled at the memory of his first days on Astrea, the bewildering customs, the strange food, the gravity that was just slightly stronger than Earth's. He'd stumbled, literally and figuratively, but he'd learned. And in learning, he'd found purpose. I had good teachers, he acknowledged. They reached the end of the conservatory, where a new section was under construction, a larger space dedicated specifically to earth plants that showed promise for integration into Astrean agriculture and medicine. Your legacy, the Queen said, gesturing to the expansion. The beginning of a true exchange between our worlds. Miles looked at the half-built structure, feeling a swell of pride. From a school janitor to a cross-species botanical consultant, life certainly took unexpected turns. Speaking of legacy, he said, remembering something he'd been meaning to discuss. I've been working with Ilix on something. A hybrid plant, combining properties of earth lavender with an Astrean flowering herb. It has potential medicinal applications for both species. The Queen's tendrils moved with interest. Truly? That would be a significant breakthrough. We're still in the early stages, Miles cautioned. But the preliminary results are promising. We're calling it Sarantha, a combination of Sarah and the Astrean word for renewal. Queen Nalaris studied him with those silvery eyes that no longer seemed alien, but simply hers. Your mate would be honored by such a tribute. Miles nodded, feeling the familiar pang of loss, but now accompanied by something new, a sense of continuation rather than conclusion. She loved gardens, growing things, bringing beauty and healing into the world. This feels right. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the larger of Astria's 3 moons rose fully above the horizon, bathing the conservatory in pale golden light. "Do you regret it?" the queen asked suddenly. Leaving Earth. Miles considered the question seriously. He thought about his cottage, now nothing but ashes. The solitary life he'd built after Sarah's death. The emptiness he'd tried to fill with routine and isolation. Then he looked around at the conservatory, at the plants from 2 worlds growing side by side. He thought about the Astrian children who now visited regularly to hear stories about Earth. The scientists who sought his practical wisdom to complement their theoretical knowledge. The tentative peace talks that might not have happened without his inadvertent intervention. "No," he said with certainty. "I don't regret it. I was existing there, not living." He turned to face the queen directly. "Here, I have purpose again. Connection." Queen Nalaris's tendrils moved in the pattern he recognized as deep satisfaction. "Then the cosmic wind blew true when it brought us to your garden." "It certainly did," Miles agreed. He looked up through the transparent ceiling at the stars. Somewhere among them, Earth continued its own journey through space, now aware it was not alone. And neither was he. When the Earth delegation arrived a week later, Miles was there to greet them, standing alongside Queen Nalaris not as her subject, but as a bridge between worlds. The human diplomats stared in undisguised amazement at the janitor who had become the first human to live among the stars. "Mr. Harper," the lead diplomat said, extending a hand after the formal introductions. "You've become something of a legend back home. The man who opened the door to the universe." Miles shook the offered hand, feeling slightly uncomfortable with the characterization. "I just helped some folks who landed in my garden," he said modestly. "Anyone would have done the same." Queen Nalaris made the subtle sound that Miles recognized as her version of suppressed laughter. "Perhaps not anyone," she commented. "It takes a special kind of courage to offer sanctuary to the unknown." As the diplomatic talks began, establishing the framework for ongoing relations between Earth and the Astrian hegemony, Miles found himself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought him here. From a man who had withdrawn from his own world to one who now helped connect two. Life rarely followed a straight path. Sometimes it took unexpected detours, through loss and isolation, through gardens where spaceships landed, through the vast reaches of interstellar space, to bring you exactly where you needed to be. And Miles Harper, former janitor of Riverdale High School, current xenobotanical consultant to the Astrian Royal Conservatory, and unofficial ambassador between worlds, had finally found where he belonged, among the stars, tending to gardens larger than he had ever imagined. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.